Okay, so I'm going to talk about open source internship programs. Have you guys seen any people around here wearing Google Summer of Code t-shirts? That's basically what this talk is about, why people in funky t-shirts are taking over the open source world. So this is not a technical talk. Most of the talks at KVM Forum are technical talks about new features in KVM or in QEMU. But the reason I'm giving this talk at KVM Forum is because QEMU, as a project, has already participated in open source internships for 6 years. That means a number of people from our community have been mentors and have participated. And yet, it's not something we really talk about a lot. It's something that kind of happens automatically. There is a crew of mentors who like to participate every year. But I want to present this in a more open way, in a more public way, get a little bit more attention to the wider group, not just the people who have already been doing the mentoring, not only the people who are already aware of it. So that's really the point of this. I hope that some of you, if you're regular contributors, if you're active in the community, if you think this is a cool thing and you want to get involved, I hope that after this presentation, you'll know more about it and you'll be able to decide whether you want to get involved. Some of you may be eligible to participate as interns if you're a student, or there are some other programs. Every internship program has its own eligibility requirements, but you may be eligible. So this presentation will give you some information about what it's like to be a student and what you can expect. And finally, by presenting this kind of formally and having the slides and the video out there, we can capture what our process is and how we participate and do internships as QEMU. Because up until now, it's never been really, held down and presented. Okay, so let's start with what are open source internships. Basically, we're talking about full-time, paid, remote work to participate, to work on a project in QEMU and libvirt and KVM and so on. There are a couple of internship programs that offer the framework where we participate. We participate in Google Summer of Code. Google Summer of Code is the biggest open source internship program. It's been around the longest. I think it's been around since 2006. And we've participated for 6 years. We also do Outreachy. Originally, Outreachy started as Outreach Program for Women. But since then, they've actually expanded their focus, and now they're trying to cover more underrepresented groups in open source to encourage people who traditionally aren't participating in open source. So these two internship programs are the ones that we participate in. And at this point, you might say, hang on a second. We're an open source project. Why do we need internship programs? Anyone can send a patch. Anyone can get into the community. So why do we do this? This makes no sense. But actually, it does make sense. So first of all, because the interns who are working on this get full-time paid work, they can really focus on something that's not just a small bug fix, a small patch. They can really focus on a kind of medium-sized feature. These programs run 12 weeks. So that means 12 weeks of full-time work. So they can really do something substantial. So that's the first thing. Because I don't know about you guys, but before I really got into QEMU, what I would do is I would use some tools. I would dig into some open source software. Every once in a while, I would send that one-off patch. But I never really got into a community because I never really had a sizable thing to work on. And that's why I kind of, until I got to QEMU, I didn't really stay and stick around. And so by giving people full-time work, they can get real experience what it's like to do open source development. The other thing is that the interns they have a kind of privileged position, because if you just send patches to a mailing list and hope that someone will review it, those people won't know you, and they might be busy, so sometimes the experience and the time it takes to get feedback is longer than you'd like. But if you are in an open source internship program, you have a mentor. Your mentor is your point of contact with that project, so with QEMU or with libvirt. And they care about making sure that you're making progress. They will help answer your questions. They might introduce you to other maintainers and people in the community who you need to communicate with. So you really have a special role here, and it's a great way to get into open source development. Okay, so why do we do it as QEMU? What do we get out of it? Why do we participate? So first of all, the hope is to get new contributors. And I'll show some of the names of the people who have participated in programs in the past, and you'll probably recognize them, because some people in our community have started off as GSOC students, Google Summer of Code, and have then moved on to work for some of the companies here that are funding QEMU and KVM development. So we get new contributors by doing this. And we get people with new ideas, people who haven't been involved in QEMU before, who have different technical backgrounds. So it's a nice way for us to kind of keep the community healthy and active. The other thing we can do is we can raise the profile of our community, because keep in mind, these are people, the people who apply as interns are people who are passionate about open source. They want to get into open source. And it's good that they see QEMU as one of the projects they can work on that list. It shows that we are a healthy community, that we are active, and that we welcome new contributors. So I think it's really good for us to do that, because I don't know if you've noticed, but we don't have a lot of marketing. We don't have a lot of outreach. QEMU kind of just exists, and mainly we just write code. That's what we do. We have a Google Plus page. That's about it. We don't do much in terms of marketing. This is one of the ways we can get attention. Okay. Another thing is that for the mentors, for those of us from the community who are acting as mentors, it's a way for us to give back to open source, because all of us, over the course of contributing to QEMU, getting involved in KVM or whatever we do, there have been people who have taken time to talk to us to help explain how the code works so that we can be productive. There have been people who've reviewed our patches or have introduced us to other people and gotten us into the community. And this is our chance to do the same thing. By being a mentor, you'll be working with someone who's enthusiastic but doesn't have any previous background in this. And you can help them just the way people got you into QEMU. So that's a nice experience, and I find it very satisfying as a mentor to do that. And finally, it is fun to do Google Summer of Code, to be a mentor, to work with students. And although that sounds pretty cliche, it's actually true, because all the mentors are volunteers, right? So if it wasn't fun, we wouldn't be doing it. So I've proven it. All right. By the way, if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me anytime. Here's our timeline. This is what we've done. The first time we participated in Google Summer of Code was 2010. And I think it was Luis Capitolino who organized that. So he kicked it off, and we had 4 interns the first year. And we continued doing that. And then we get to 2012, and that year we were not accepted because Google provides a pool of funding, and organizations like QEMU can apply. And that year we didn't get accepted, and that was really disappointing because I was the one who wrote the application form. So I felt pretty guilty. I felt like I'd let people down because I knew there was mentors, people who had wanted to mentor students that year, and they couldn't because we didn't have any funding. So when I talked to Google, they said there wasn't really anything we did wrong. It was more that that year they wanted to allocate funding to new organizations that hadn't participated before, and that we should keep trying. So the next year, we tried again. And in 2013, we got back in. And that time, we got back in with more interns than ever. We had 9 interns that year. And the other thing that was new was that libvirt came along with us. So when you join one of these programs, there is a certain amount of administrative overhead and experience of the process that you need in order to have successful internships. And so what some projects do, like that year, libvirt did this, is instead of applying as their own org, they joined QEMU under the umbrella of QEMU. And so that way, their mentors could kind of participate without having to go through the administrative overhead and have experience with how the process works. And actually, if you look at the end, you can see that what happened is that libvirt, over the years, their team of mentors, they got enough experience, they grew, they had enough students, they were just confident with the whole thing, and they now go and apply as their own org. So they've now forked off from us again. So now they are their own independent org. So that was very nice. So we've helped them join as well. Let's see, what else did we do? So then 2014 was our first Outreachy. Previously, we'd only done Google Summer of Code. But in 2014, we did Outreachy. Back then, it was still called Outreach Program for Women. The one thing you might notice there, even though the format of Outreachy is very similar to Google Summer of Code, it's a 12-week paid internship. So basically the same situation with a mentor and all of that. What is different is the funding model. Google Summer of Code, Google has a pool of money that they're generously giving to students to work on open source projects. Outreachy is different. Outreachy provides a platform for doing internships, but you need to find funding. So we only had one intern, and that's because we're good at coding, we're not good at fundraising. So if any of you work for companies that want to promote diversity, then please talk to me after this talk, because it would be great to get more funding so that we can have more interns working on QEMU, also through the Outreachy program. Okay, the only thing I'll still say about this slide is that this year we're doing Outreachy, we're doing GSOC, we have 7 interns, so things are still going strong. Okay, so this is nice. This is a list of the people who have participated over the past 6 years. These are the names. You might recognize some of them. The size is proportional to how many commits they have in QEMU, KVM, and libvirt. Okay, I made you some O'Reilly fake book covers, so hope you enjoy them. Basically, the next part of this presentation, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about how these internship programs work, what the different phases are, so that you understand how it runs. Okay, so the first thing is let's talk about the roles, because I have thrown out some of the terminology without really explaining it. So I've mentioned mentors and the internship programs, but basically the way it works is that we have internship programs like Google Summer of Code and Outreachy. Now, some open source projects, like I think GNOME, I can't remember, they don't need to use Google Summer of Code. They just run their own program. There are some organizations that do that. But by doing that, they take on a load of extra work, because what they need to do is they need to have contracts with the students, legal contracts, for the work. They need to handle the payments, the money that is paid to the interns. And so by participating in Google Summer of Code and Outreachy, we offload that, we outsource that. We don't need to handle the legal issues. We don't need to spend time on it. So that's one of the benefits we get from participating in internship programs. Another thing that's great about internship programs is that they are a platform. And they get a lot more attention. A lot of computer science students know about Google Summer of Code. They may not know that QEMU is participating that year, but they know about Google Summer of Code. So they go to the website and see the list of organizations and see QEMU, and they click on it, and then they see what we're offering. So imagine we ran our own program. How would we get as much attention as Google Summer of Code to get all these excellent students to apply? Well, we wouldn't, because we suck at marketing. So this is one of the benefits to participating in an internship program, is we get this platform, and we get the marketing, the brand for free. Okay, and then we have the intern, the person who is committed to doing this project and does their full-time paid internship. They can be anywhere around the world, pretty much. And it's remote work, just like any other member of the community. It's not the case that they have to be in an office with their mentor or anything like that. Most students do not have face-to-face, real-life contact with their mentor at all. Instead, it's just done like all the other regular open source development that we do on mailing lists, on IRC, and so on. Okay, then there's the mentor. The mentor is someone from our community, a regular contributor, someone who has experience with the development process and is able to, guide someone else through it as well. And they help their intern, but they also evaluate them, so they make sure that they stay on track and that they're doing what they promised they would do. And then finally, there's the organization administrator. I've been doing that for the past few years, and basically what I do is I apply with Google Summer of Code. I talk to the Outreachy folks. I make sure that we get accepted. And then I organize the mentors. I invite people to participate and be mentors. And I help out with administrative stuff. Any questions? Okay, I'll move on. So we've learned about the roles, but how does the program flow? What's the timeline? So the basic idea is that there's 3 phases. There's the application phase, there's the community bonding period, and then there's the coding phase. The coding phase is what you think about. It's where the actual work happens. It's where the internship, where the intern is working on their project and the mentor is kind of there in order to support the intern. But the application phase is actually the busiest phase and the most critical phase, because that's when all these application forms from interns are coming in, from candidates, people who want to become interns. And that's when the mentors have to scramble and figure out who they want to work with that year. Let's see. The community bonding period is actually the time in between. That's after the accepted interns have been announced, but before the coding begins. And that's just because of the timeline of the program. Typically, the coding happens in the summer so that university students have a summer break and can focus on this full time. And so during the community bonding period, what we usually do is we encourage the interns to subscribe to the mailing lists, to get on IRC, to try building the code and already look around so they're familiar with it. That way, once the coding starts, they're ready to go and they can write patches and so on. Paolo and several other people have been keeping a bite-sized tasks wiki page up to date, which is like a great starting point for small QEMU tasks that newcomers can do. And so that's sometimes something that people who have time during the community bonding period do, is they already practice, getting patches upstream. Even if it's not working on their project, they're solving, small problems, doing some refactorings that we've suggested. So that works well. Okay, I'm going to run through the kind of things that mentors do. Talk first about the application phase. So during the application phase, I just said that it's basically the busiest phase of the program. That's actually where mentors have to do the most work. And what mentors do is they come up with a list of project ideas they'd be willing to mentor. For some people, that's only one thing. They're interested in mentoring one thing. Other people have a bunch of ideas, and then they'll see where the strongest candidate is, and they choose one or two, and they'll take on those projects in the summer. So, so our mentors come up with a list of project ideas, and these are the ideas that candidates will see when they're browsing, our wiki page and seeing what they can get involved in. Sometimes we get candidates who have custom ideas and who say, well, actually, I don't care about the suggested ideas. I have my own thing. I have my pet feature that I really want to do. And that's a little bit more challenging because they will then need to find someone from the community who's willing to step up and mentor them. So if it's a very niche or exotic project that no one has experience in, no one wants to mentor, they might be out of luck. They might have to go back and say, I'm going to take a predefined project idea. But I just wanted to mention it that that's possible as well. And that is kind of cool. We've done some of those over the years. So what happens is that we have these project ideas up there. People are browsing the wiki, and they apply. And before they apply, they get in touch with the mentor, and they will start discussing the project idea. Because what they want to do is they want to fill out an application form and come up with a rough project plan where they say, OK, in the first 2 weeks, I'll solve this task, and then I'll do this. They need to show that they have some kind of plan in mind for how they're going to tackle their project. So this is the phase where, as a mentor, you're answering questions about the project idea. You're helping these applicants figure out how they're going to solve the problem. And in the back of your mind, you're kind of evaluating them and deciding which one do I want to select, which one do I want to work with this summer. Okay, and then the next step is we interview the top candidates. So once we've been in touch with them a little bit, we get a feel for which ones are the ones we most likely want to work with. We invite them for interviews. It's just an IRC interview, and I'll go into detail a little bit more on that. But that's what really gives us a depth to decide who is the right fit, who do we want to work with. And if we found someone to work with, then that's how we end the application phase. We select an intern. And it's better not to select any intern if you didn't get any really good candidates. Because if you have someone who's not a right fit, then you still have to support them throughout this 12-week internship. So it's better to really only do it if you're confident and you're happy with the candidates you have. Okay, so one interesting thing, the key input here, the key ingredient is obviously these project ideas that people are going to apply for. And over the years, we've kind of learned what works well as a project idea and what doesn't work well as a project idea. I think there's a spectrum of project ideas. Some of them might be too easy and not really worth the 12-week project that these internships need to fit into. Some of them are too risky or even impossible because they're just too hard or involve too much, cross-community work, and it's just not possible to do them in 12 weeks. It really depends on the strength of the intern, right? Some interns have a lot of background knowledge already, and they'll be able to tackle harder problems. So for them, something that's challenging but good is something that might be impossible for someone who's very new. And so it's not just the project idea, it depends on the intern. But there's a couple of attributes I think we've found over the years that are important to make these project ideas solid, give interns good projects to work on. First thing, it has to be a well-defined project idea. That just means it has to have scope, right? It has to have an end to the project, because if you've got a 12-week project, you want to be able to come up with a kind of plan and know when you're done. So an example of this would be implementing a new emulated device in QEMU. Because you can get a hardware data sheet, and you can get the registers, and you'll know when you're done, right? There's a finite list of features and things on there, and you can implement them. An example of something that's not well-defined would be maybe a performance investigation, saying, oh, networking is slow. Let's just have the student mess around for 12 weeks and try to figure out where the bottleneck is and optimize it and get the patches upstream. That's unlikely to go well, especially if the person doesn't have a lot of previous experience in virtualized networking. They might not even know where to look. So that's not well-defined. So it's better to have well-defined project ideas. They also have to be self-contained. So it would be unfair to give a project to someone that depends on other code that's in flight and hasn't been merged yet. Their whole project could be basically not successful and not complete simply because of things outside of their control. We want people to have project ideas that they can drive themselves. Project ideas where they're in control, right? Their destiny, they're in full control of their destiny. They don't have to wait for, other people and things like that. Because that tends to slow them down. And when you only have 12 weeks, you really need to make sure that you can complete the project start to finish. This is an obvious one. It should be uncontroversial. The project idea should not be something where the intern is working for a few weeks, starts sending patches, and then the community says, no way, we're not going to merge this. That would be unfair. That would be a very bad experience. And so we always like to choose things that are just obvious improvements to QEMU, things that are not going to get the intern in trouble. Because remember, this is someone who doesn't have a lot of background. So if you're expecting them to get into a flame war and make technical arguments to justify the existence of their project, that's pretty harsh. So instead, we try to do things that are just obvious improvements. Those are good project ideas. And the final thing that makes a nice project idea is to do something that's incremental, where no matter how far they get, whether they exceed the scope of their project or whether they actually don't make it all the way to where they said they would, you still have deliverables, you still have things that get merged. One thing that comes to mind is that recently there's been work on modularizing pieces of QEMU so they can be in their own shared libraries, like the block drivers. And if you have a project like that and you say, I'm going to try to modularize the block drivers, you don't have to modularize all of them. If you don't make it towards the end, say you've done Gluster and Ceph, you've put them into their own block drivers. Each one of those is a useful piece of work. It's not like a big bang approach project where if you don't complete 100% of it, that feature won't exist at all. So it's good to have incremental projects where we can be flexible about how long those projects take. So these are the kind of things that I think are important for having solid project ideas that'll give both the mentor and the intern a good experience. Okay, I'm going to talk about the interviews, and coding exercises are notorious for basically being arbitrary and unfair and stuff like that. So we try not to do that. So during the application phase, when candidates are applying, mentors will interview the top candidates in order to kind of really figure out, is this the person I want to accept as an intern for this year? And the way we do that is we do that with an interview. It consists of two parts. The coding exercise and the discussion. And the discussion follows from the coding exercise. So we start with the coding exercise. And the point of the exercise is not to be a trick question. It's not to check whether they read their Introduction to Algorithms book and they can quickly code up, a splay tree or something like that. It's simply about, does this person know how to write production quality code that we could merge into QEMU? And the reason for this is, remember, this is only a 12-week project. We don't really have time to teach people how to code. They already need to be fluent. And so the coding exercise we do are kind of real-world problems, not trick problems. They have a little bit of memory management, a little bit of pointers, a little bit of error handling. Basically enough of that stuff so we can tell, is this a person who just had a single university module where they used C? And they think they know C, but there's going to be a ton of buffer overflows and bugs in their code. Or is this someone who really has experience and can write code where we'd be confident in merging it into QEMU and accepting their work? So that's the point of the coding exercise. That leads into the discussion. Once they complete the discussion, we go on. We look at their code. We ask them questions about what their solution that they've come up with. And so we can begin to see how do they react to code review? How do they think about their code? We can ask them to expand the requirements of the original problem. And we can ask them, how would you extend your solution if the input was 4 gigabytes instead of just a tiny list? How would it affect the performance? We can start to drill down and understand how deep is their technical ability. Another good thing that we often talk about is their own personal and hobby projects, especially with Google Summer of Code. University students. We have some really passionate people applying. We have some really talented people applying. They've done a lot of hobby projects. So it's a good way to talk to them and find out about something that they're an expert in and see what technical problems they've solved in the past. Even though they haven't maybe had real jobs, a lot of them have some cool emulator projects or OS kernels that they've played with or things like that. So it's always fun to talk about that and get an idea. The final thing we talk about in an interview is open source experience. And we're not looking for people who are already contributing a lot to open source because they wouldn't really need to try and do something like Google Summer of Code. Of course, they're welcome to do it. But what we want to see is whether people have an affinity with open source. Because if someone is not passionate about open source, then they're basically just treating this as a summer job. They just want to do an interesting project, to get money, and to move on. But that's not what we want. We want someone who's passionate about open source, someone who wants to join QEMU and join libvirt and join KVM. So that's why it's good to find out what their experience is and what they're interested in open source. And that's about it. I mean, we give the intern chances as well to ask any questions that they have about the program. And that's the interview. And after that, the mentors have a pretty firm idea of who it is they want to work with that summer. OK, so then we can move on to the coding phase. What do mentors do during the coding phase? During the coding phase, it's pretty simple. They set up regular meetings with their intern. And we found this to be very important. I'm going to talk about it a little bit in a second. It's important for the mentor, obviously, to always be reviewing their intern's patches quickly, because it's only 12 weeks long, and if the intern gets, if code review upstream takes a long time, then the project will be delayed. So putting in extra effort there is also important. Usually we say the time commitment is around 5 hours a week for a mentor, maybe a little bit less. It depends on the project. And then the other thing is just answering questions that come up from the intern. If the intern gets stuck, helping them. Sometimes helping them debug. Sometimes literally sitting down and saying, OK, let's debug this, or I'll try to reproduce this bug you're seeing that we can't explain. And that's it. It's just working together on code. OK, I'll talk a little bit about the meetings that I mentioned, because a lot of people don't like meetings. We have too many meetings. But we have actually found that it is very important in these remote work projects with interns to have a regular meeting. Because pretty much every single time where a project failed, and they have failed in the past, we've done this for 6 years, one of the elements has been lack of communication. We couldn't get hold of the intern, we couldn't get hold of the mentor, and because of that, things derailed to a point where we couldn't save the project. Sometimes even in trivial ways. The one example I have is a couple of years ago, there was a deadline for submitting what's called the midterm evaluation. It's part of the internship program that you have to go online to like a web form and just fill out essentially a multiple choice form that just covers your progress. A student fills it out to evaluate their own progress and their mentor. The mentor fills it out in order to evaluate their student's progress. What happened is that someone went on like a camping trip or a fishing trip. The intern disappeared for a few days, forgot about this deadline. And because we didn't have regular communication going, and the intern was basically allowed to just roam free and do whatever, there was no one there to remind them, oh, by the way, next week you better submit this. And by the time they got back, the internship program, not us, not the mentor, not me, but the internship program had already seen that they'd missed the deadline, and they were not willing to compromise. They said, you're out, you've failed. And when I analyzed that and I thought back, I was like, man, if we had just communicated regularly, we could have avoided this silly thing. And this person was capable. They weren't bad at their project. They were doing a good job. Shouldn't have happened. So yeah, that's why we do weekly meetings. It also means that if the intern gets stuck and isn't making progress, the maximum delay they can hit is 1 week. And after that, they'll have their weekly meeting. Their mentor will get them back on track. OK, I think that's it. Another trick that we use, one thing we have found over the years that helps a lot, is having not just one mentor with one intern. Instead, we co-mentor. We get 2 mentors for 1 intern. So this helps a lot because of time zones and availability. If the mentor is busy with work, they might not be responding quickly enough. And now the intern is stuck and is waiting and needs help and things like that. And so you can reduce the stress on the mentors. You can increase the response time, or decrease the response time is what we want to do by having 2 mentors. So that maybe if one of them is offline, maybe at least the other one is online. So that's one thing we do. And it's also a good way to get new mentors in, people who want to join, but who say, I don't know if I want to be responsible for working 12 weeks with someone, or I want to go on vacation, I want to be away on holiday for a few days. So if we co-mentor, we can solve these problems. So that's something we've learned over the years. It makes our projects more successful. OK. How to become a mentor? What are the requirements? The main thing is you need to be a regular contributor to QEMU. You have to be somewhat active in the community so that you have experience with the open source process, and you could guide someone else through that. You have to be willing to spend about 5 hours a week on the internship program. And basically what you do is you come up with project ideas, things in your area that you'd like to mentor, you'd like to have someone working on. And there are 2 times. So either we can do Google Summer of Code or we can do Outreachy. So the times are February and September, when I send out emails to the mailing list and I invite people to volunteer as mentors. But if you want, you can also just contact me directly, and I'll keep a note of it and let you know when the next round of internship program starts. OK. That's about all I had. I've posted a bunch of links to resources, guides on how to be a mentor, and also our own wiki pages so you can see past years. What sort of projects have we done? Things like that. So feel free to explore that. Are there any questions?
That's okay, I can speak loudly. Since you said that there are dependencies, and if there are dependencies, those projects are difficult to handle. So if there is something to do with QEMU, Libwood, QEMU, some dependency, do you think it's impossible to get things done?
OK.
Is there any suggestion?
Yeah, so the question was, I said that project ideas, there's kind of a spectrum of project ideas, and some of the project ideas could be too risky or even impossible. One of the factors is whether there are dependencies, whether this project is self-contained. So I think the question was, if you have a project that needs to touch, for example, multiple layers, multiple projects, like Libwork and QEMU, those are more complicated projects. It could be dependencies. Can those be done? And the answer is yes, and we do them. It just depends on the candidate. It just depends on the people who are applying, whether you find someone who has the ability. This year, Alex mentioned this in the keynote. This year, I mentored a project that actually involved touching a lot of components. It involved adding a new kernel module to Linux. It involved modifying TCP dump and Wireshark. So that person, he really dived in, and he worked with multiple communities. But I considered it an advanced project, and when I interviewed the candidates for that project, I was careful to only pick someone who I could sense is really able to do that, because that takes a lot more work than just working on one thing in QEMU.
Follow up on that. Could you help if there is any project ideas for QEMU to be refined?
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
I have some ideas of the equipment when I
Uh-huh.
want to do it for any cloud,
Uh-huh.
for do it. Instead, if we can define it and would you help?
Yes, absolutely. So the question is if you have ideas for project ideas, things you'd like to either be a mentor in or maybe even just suggest as project ideas, absolutely. I'd be happy. And this isn't, super strict. It's a spectrum, and we try to get a good fit. But I'm happy to talk to you offline about project ideas. Okay, are there any other questions? All right, thank you very much.